Hello, and thank you for joining Direct Marketing News for the new mobile rules for search, social, and display, data-driven strategies for more clicks, calls, and sales. It's brought to you by Dialogue Tech. I'm Al Urbanski, Senior Editor of Direct Marketing News, and your host for today's webcast. More than 50% of digital advertising will be mobile in 2015, and consumer engagement is forecasted to increase on mobile devices as social networks begin building bigger profiles this year in advertising and e-commerce. In planning to allow for this shift, you will do well to give attention to new strategies involving attribution and optimization to drive maximum conversions, revenue, and ROI from your campaigns. You will learn about some of these new strategies today from Blair Symes of Dialogue Tech and Joel Grossman from Leapfrog Online. Joel, Senior Vice President of Technology at the agency, has spent the last 15 years designing interactive digital campaigns aimed at driving conversions. Blair, Director of Content Marketing at Dialogue Tech, has spent that same time focusing on the crucial areas of optimization and attribution. Today you will discover advanced tips for targeting mobile consumers via search, social, and display ads, new strategies for optimizing mobile ads and landing pages, how to track and optimize web and call conversions to improve ROI, and how new Facebook and Google ad formats and advancing mobile technologies will affect marketing. Before we get started, a few quick reminders. If you're on Twitter and would like to comment, please use the hashtag DMNWebcast. We will have an audience Q&A at the end of the presentation, so you can submit your questions anytime throughout the webcast, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Should you experience any technical issues, communicate them to us via the question box, and we'll assist you as quickly as possible. Also, following today's session, you will receive an email with a link to a recording of today's session, as well as an opportunity to get a hold of the deck being used today by our speakers. Now, let's get started. Here's Blair Symes.
Thanks a lot, Al, and thanks everybody for joining us today. We've got a full agenda, but I wanted to go over it briefly, and basically we're going to be covering, we'll begin by covering some trends that we're seeing in the marketing world that shows how marketing and really the world has gone mobile. Then we'll dive in, do a deeper dive of how mobile, when you're trying to optimize conversions and campaigns from mobile, there are different tactics that you need to consider than what you're used to doing digital marketing on desktop. So we'll dive into those with both online conversions and offline conversions, spending some time really discussing also the call conversion component, which is very critical to mobile because of smartphones and not something maybe you were considering as much in desktop digital marketing. So before we begin, just a quick overview. If you're not familiar with Dialogue Tech, we are the combination of two companies, If by Phone and Mongoose Metrics, and we're the leader in call analytics and automation software for enterprise marketers and agencies. And what that means is that we offer services such as call tracking, scoring, routing, recording, and analytics technologies to your marketing campaigns. Before I begin with the webinar, let me hand it over to Joel from Leapfrog Online to do a quick overview of Leapfrog.
Thanks, Blair. Leapfrog Online is a different kind of digital agency. We've been in the digital marketing space for about 20 years. We have a very cross-functional team focused on all the different disciplines that you need to, and we'll talk about for generating a closed loop of data across the entire consumer purchase path. We've acquired a great deal of customers for our clients. You see some on the right, and there's several more that you can see on our website, leapfrogonline.com. Back to you, Blair.
Great. Thanks, Joel. If you can advance the next slide, we'll begin. So I wanted to set the stage with a couple slides showing statistics that really prove how the world has gone mobile. Smartphone adoption, of course, everyone today has a smartphone. 64% of Americans own smartphones, and that number is continuing to increase. By 2017, there'll be nearly 300 million smartphones in the United States alone. But it's not just the amount of smartphones that are available, but it's how people are engaging with their smartphones and mobile devices, which is really important to marketers. Statistics show that people spend more time on their mobile devices than they do watching television. And when it comes to digital marketing and digital media, people consume more digital media on their smartphones and mobile devices than they do on their desktops today, and that number continues to grow. So these trends are having a tremendous impact on how marketers do digital marketing. You can see some of the statistics here, from search to social, display, email, and video. All the trends point to the fact that people are consuming or running these searches or consuming social media, watching videos more on their smartphones and mobile devices than they do on desktops. And again, these numbers are increasing. They're not going down. So as we progress, we're seeing a really heavy focus on people living their lives on their smartphones and mobile devices. And that's the reason why we're also seeing marketers are shifting their ad spend away from desktop towards mobile. As you can see from some stats, recent stats from eMarketer, mobile advertising in the U.S. is going to go up 50% this year to $29 billion. That's nearly half of all digital advertising spend will be for mobile devices. And by 2019, an astounding 72% of digital ad spend will be mobile. That's almost $66 billion. So 72% of digital ads on mobile versus desktop. So that's the reason why the tips we're covering today are so important. And Joel will begin with some tips around conversions for offline.
Thanks, Blair. So what's really clear after the years that we've spent doing mobile digital marketing at Leapfrog is that the mobile consumer and the channel as a whole really converts differently, and that's really what we're focused on, the actual revenue-generating event. And there's so much opportunity to drive greater revenue with mobile. So, but there are a couple things, some good news, some bad news, some things that you just need to deal with. The first is that the good news, mobile customers across a wide range of industries convert generally at a higher rate, right? We've seen on the low end 20%, as much as 140% higher, depending on the industry and the client, for mobile relative to desktop conversions. However, accordingly, this is, you have to deal with the fact that the cost of that kind of advertising can be as much as 5 times higher, right? The publishers and marketers, we all know that folks on mobile devices tend to be readier to buy and are willing, accordingly, to pay more to reach those folks who are ready to buy. So the reasons for that are pretty straightforward, right? On a mobile device, there's just not as much ad position available to you. Because of that limited amount of real estate, the costs are higher. There's a great deal of competition. Certainly, at this point, intraday, very, very tight competition depending on brands and what channel we're talking about. And there's not as much visibility for marketers about exactly where those organic placements may be and what the intersection between some of the paid advertising and those organic placements look like. So that's really continually ratcheting up the cost depending on seasonality and the consumer we're trying to reach. So the other thing to be aware of, which is just sort of a state of play and table stakes, is understanding that mobile relative to desktop, the traffic arrival varies meaningfully at the day of week and the time of day, and really seasonally in general across the calendar depending on the specific industry seasonality. But what we see, which is not too surprising, is that the mobile and tablet devices are used more often on the weekend. Folks in the office tend to be using desktops, and so you see desktop usage spiking during the work hours. In the evening, folks come home and use their tablets perhaps as a second screen. They're watching TV or doing something else. But mobile, for the most part, we see extended throughout the day. People have their devices, and we'll talk a little bit about what the implications of that are in a minute. But the main point we try to make to our clients is that folks on mobile devices convert differently, right? And so when we think about all those different factors, be they time, be that the cost, be that the propensity to convert, you have to think about this holistically. It's not sort of the normal state of affairs in a mobile world. So what does that holistic mobile strategy entail? For us, we think about 4 things, right? And it's really about data, right? 4 different types of data that are critical to crafting that holistic strategy. Consumer data, you can see some of the specific types that we look at, but really trying to capture as much information about the person visiting and where and when it is and what they're using to visit us. Information about media campaigns, sources and channels and placements and creative, remarketing, all sorts of different things. The actual online session, so we mean when the person is actually browsing the site, to try and enter information or connect with the brand. What do we see? What did we show them? What happened? What was their behavior? And then offline in the call center, same set of things. Was it a sale? Was it not a sale? Was it a customer service call? What happened? How much did they end up purchasing or not? What IVR did they reach? What did the agent say to them? How long did it take? So these are all critical pieces of information. Now, historically, in the pre-mobile era, these types of data were managed in a very siloed way. And what we found, it's critical to tie all those pieces of data together holistically, and we'll talk about what that enables you to do. So from the standpoint of media targeting, when we have that holistic strategy, we think about, again, a consumer-centric way of doing marketing in mobile, not a channel-specific way. Okay, there are so many different ways that consumers are using mobile devices to engage with media, as Blair described to you earlier. And so when we think about that, we have to consider it as a whole group, not as individual approaches. You have to really coordinate those different things. And the reason is that mobile consumers are operating with a little bit different perspective. And I think, since most of us are carrying those devices, we understand we have them on all the time, right? Our attention is fractured because we're constantly going back and forth between our mobile device and whatever else we're doing. We're moving around. We're obviously mobile. And the device carries a certain personal connotation, right? It's very, very much a part of our day-to-day life and what we do and how we think about ourselves. And so there's implications from a media standpoint of all of those four things. From an always-on perspective, you want to be using social and email to be constantly targeting folks all day long because you never know where and when they are, but they're always on. You want to use higher impact things like mobile video and audio to cut through the clutter of all the different textual information that they're receiving on their phone. You want to use different kinds of targeted display and things like in-game for people who are moving around who may be using games in a 5-minute period they have between two meetings or to pick up their kid or whatever the case may be. As they're very compelling. And lastly, you want to use really sophisticated segmentation and content strategies. So make sure that for that personal device, you're reinforcing that sense of personal connection to the mobile device. And we'll talk about what those can entail in a bit. What we do know after doing this for a long time, there's a Google case study with us and our client Time Warner Cable that talks about sort of the early days of doing mobile marketing that drives home this point that SEM, search engine marketing, is really a critical part of the mobile landscape. You can see relative to desktop, it really plays a highly preponderant role in what we do. And, you want to think about the impact of that across different devices, but also in terms of cost, as we talked about earlier, the amount of customer service calls that may result in because they're searching activity, they may not actually be buying activity. So a number of different pieces to deal with there we'll talk about in a bit. But the four main things we want you to understand is, a holistic strategy is not a one-size-fits-all strategy, right? Having access to those different types of data about consumers, about media, about online experience, about offline experience, all that's going to give you the opportunity to customize. And in the media context, that means messaging that's tailored to get a very, very high response rate based on what we know about that consumer, targeting that either allows you to do things based on time of day, day of week, or the location of the consumer geographically. Different bidding strategies. There's probably a whole separate webinar that we can talk about mobile and other multipliers to use, particularly within search, to adjust your pricing to make sure you're reaching those mobile higher propensity to convert consumers better, and providing flexibility in terms of the actual conversion, the actual sale, whether they want to complete the transaction on their device or in the call center. So let's talk about on the device first. And when we think about converting in online digital experiences, there's really about 5 things that you want to consider. The first and probably the most important is responsive design, which has become much more of an understood thing to do, but it doesn't make it any less important, and there's certainly always optimization that we're doing when we look across all of our clients' digital experiences for conversion. You want to make sure that you're rendering that content in such a way that it's independent of any device that someone may be using. As we all know, there are new devices coming onto the market with updated browsers all the time, and we want to make sure that we can show everything clearly and properly. Second is linearized content, and by that we mean that the content is organized in such a way as whether the device is rotated horizontally or vertically or whatever the device may be, you can see all the necessary content to complete the conversion process with very, very minimal effort and no need to reorient. The third thing is absolutely make sure to include click-to-call functionality. We'll talk a lot about what happens in the call center. Blair's going to talk a lot about call analytics and the importance of understanding what happens in the relationship between mobile and calls, but absolutely need to include click-to-call functionality so you don't need to enter a phone number. You can simply tap on an icon and dial. The fourth thing would be mobile optimized forms. So that really generally means larger, more finger tapping friendly, so that the keyboard entry is not difficult. And again, this is all about minimizing the friction. And then the last is persistent functionality. We've seen some clients go to market with sites where either navigation is not always present or other things that are required for call to action disappear depending on the orientation. We want to make sure that all the functionality of the digital experience is available at all times. And then the most simplest but really frequently overlooked thing that we found is that really focusing on load time will improve mobile performance dramatically, right? And this is true of both mobile and desktop. And I don't mean to pick on our fine hosts at DM News, but really this is an opportunity for everyone. There's so many sites that are not optimized to load fast for mobile, and we allocate a specific budget to optimization for speed for all of our clients because we find that with even minimal decreases in the amount of load time, we're seeing dramatic improvements in terms of conversion. There's some wonderful free tools out there like Google Page Speed Insights, or there are other tools available that you can buy as part of your web analytics packages, but really we're absolutely wanting to be loading in less than 3 seconds and preferably much, much less than that. And that's something that you want to constantly be going back and checking on. So that's mobile targeting and mobile online conversion. We'll talk about mobile offline conversion after Blair runs us through some information about mobile advertising and inbound calls. Blair?
Great. Thanks, Joel. Joel touched on it a second ago, but I wanted to dive more into click-to-call functionality and the importance of attribution and ways to control what happens during the call experience to not just optimize the amount of calls you get, but the amount of conversions you get from those calls, sales conversions. So whether it's an appointment, an opportunity, or a sale, whichever your business model is driving towards, there are ways you can actually control the phone conversation to help steer the lead into that path. So we touched on click-to-call functionality, but one of the main differences between mobile and desktop ads is click-to-call. It's the ability to actually trigger a phone call directly from the ad displaying on the smartphone. Most of you should be familiar if you're doing paid search on mobile with what a call extension is, but here are examples from Google and from Bing. It's basically the clickable call button or the clickable phone number that appears within your paid search advertising text. And people, depending on what your business model is, people really do click on these buttons. I mean, Google and Bing worldwide generate billions of calls a month from call extensions. Google did a study that shows that 70% of people will click on the call extension button directly from the ad text. And even if they don't, if they click on the link instead and visit your web page, they're still 8% more likely to click on your ad if it has a call extension. So definitely consider including call extensions in your paid search ads if you're not already. To reinforce this point, Google actually has different formats that take advantage of call extensions. So they recently released what's called nearby business ads. You can see an example of that on the left. There are statistics that show that people use their smartphones to do local search. Almost half of all mobile search has local intent, people looking for businesses or services near them. And you don't need to go any further than the data points of the increase in searches that use the phrases nearby or near me. In the past year, there's been a 100% increase in those searches, and 80% of them are happening on mobile devices and smartphones. So now Google has this new format where if they include the term nearby or near me in their search, it shows this particular ad format where it's a simple ad text-wise with direction extensions and call extensions. On the right, you see call-only ads, which is a way for advertisers who prioritize phone calls over other types of leads. You can just have an ad where you're basically the only conversion that happens is the call. And what's great about these is that you can, once you understand what a call's value is to your business, you can bid on these ads based on that value to optimize your ROI, since the only conversion possible is a phone call. Now, I just want to touch on new technologies briefly. Voice search on the left, and of course the Apple Watch and wearable technologies both play a role in search, specifically voice search, where somebody, instead of using a keyboard, vocalizes commands. Now, if you are, I think the jury's still out on both of these technologies, though voice search is seeming to be growing in volume, where there's reports that show the Apple Watch, the sales have dropped off after the early adopters. So while the jury's still out, I think you need to be aware that younger people are definitely using the voice search component. And when you want to optimize marketing to take advantage of this, you should consult Google's list of common voice commands to understand how to use long-tail keywords in order to better target paid search. You should also include a call extension like this example, because people who talk into their phones, without are avoiding the keyboard, they usually want to talk to somebody as a conversion. They do not want to pick up the phone and then start typing in their keyboard to fill out a web form. They want to call someone. But it's not just search. Social media is also taking advantage now of call buttons. You can see examples on the left and right for Facebook and Twitter. The Facebook example is a recent one. They just recently released the ability to include call now as a call to action in their local ads. So if you're doing social media advertising, especially on Facebook and Twitter, the two big ones, you should test out the call button and see if it's something where it makes sense for your business, if it's something where your consumers will be willing to call you directly. It helps to have some kind of incentive, like the sales or the giveaways, perhaps, to encourage calls, but it's definitely something for you to test as well. Here's some data that really drives home the importance of phone calls, not just directly from the ads, but also people who click on your ads to visit your landing pages or your mobile website. B.I. Kelsey recently put this data out earlier this month, and it shows that 76 billion calls were made from mobile advertising last year just in the United States, and that number is going to grow to 162 billion by 2019. That's a huge increase. The numbers are already big, and they're only getting bigger. So you should be aware that phone calls from mobile are a very, very real part of your ROI, and that's actually great news for most marketers. Studies show that phone calls are more, they convert to revenue up to 10 times more than web clicks. People who call are more engaged and ready to speak to a salesperson, and salespeople rate phone calls as their preferred type of lead. So it's great for marketing to generate those calls. One way to do that is to make sure you put a phone number on every single web page. 47% of people said that they would actually explore other brands if they didn't quickly find a phone number to call. And stats show that when people are ready to buy, they find it extremely helpful to have that phone number to call to engage with a salesperson. So what that leads up to is the idea that as you do your analytics, people who run desktop marketing are very familiar with analyzing click-through rates and web leads. But when you do mobile advertising, you need to make sure you include calls and call attribution with your analytics. Here's a quick example of somebody who runs through a paid search, clicks on a paid search ad, and triggers a call. Without call analytics, the marketer really has no visibility into a conversion, that a conversion actually happened here. You're paying for the click, but in your analytics, it basically shows a wasted spend, even though it wasn't. You triggered a call, and that call went to somewhere in your business. Now, you need to be able to use that data in the platforms you use to optimize your marketing, like Google AdWords, bid management tools, CRM tools, and so forth. But without call attribution, you can't do that. And basically, it provides this significant hole in your ROI. So without call attribution, you have your ROI numbers are grossly inaccurate. It could be, we have data that shows that up to 50% of landing page conversions are calls, and you might be missing up to 50% of your call data. What that means is, with inaccurate ROI data, you end up investing in campaigns that aren't really driving revenue. You could eliminate programs that are, and as marketers, you might undersell the value of your investment to your CEO or to your clients if you're an agency. So call attribution helps solve that problem for any type of marketing that you're doing, not just mobile or digital, but offline as well. And it works by giving you unique trackable phone numbers that automatically display on your landing pages, or you can add them into your click-to-call ads. So when someone calls those numbers, that software attributes the call directly to the keyword search, ad and search engine, and web page in the instance of paid search, or to the social media site and ad placement that generated it. Here's the same example with call attribution. So now as marketers, you actually understand who's calling from your conversions. You understand that a conversion took place. You know who the caller is. You know where the caller went. You can use that data in your other tools to help optimize and track performance. And, you're able to understand exactly what's working and what's not, and put your money and your spend in the right places. So again, it ties every conversion back to the right marketing source. You can then prove to your CEO or your clients the full value of your marketing, and you can optimize on what's working and eliminate the spend on what's not. As I said, it works for all the major platforms and advertisers that you do. And it works not just for calls from directly from the ads. It works from calls that come from the landing pages. So you should be tracking not just the marketing source, but understanding if someone visits your mobile website, what pages they go to before and after they called. You can also do analytics on which browser or operating system they're using, so that you can do more refined targeting of your mobile campaigns. You can target those operating systems and browsers. You can also understand exactly where the person is calling from geographically, so that you can do geofencing and ads that target specific areas of the country, specific locations. And you can also understand who took the call, so you know exactly where the call was routed and what happened on the call. So using that call data in your A/B test is critical for mobile. As you can see in this example, it's just a simple test where they changed the color of the call to action button. And what that did, just that simple change from version A to version B ended up having 130% increase in phone calls. So when you do your A/B test, when you optimize your landing pages on mobile, be sure to include the call conversion component in that, so you really know what's working and what's not. Now, one interesting thing to consider that you probably were not considering for desktop conversions is what happens once the conversion comes in, where it goes, and how marketers can actually affect what happens once the conversion comes in. So while calls are high-quality leads, not every call that your marketing generates is going to be a high-quality sales lead. Sometimes they might be very short conversations, people looking for directions or basic business information. They might be calling for your support team, for example. They might be accidental calls. So as marketers, you don't want to pass non-sales leads on to your sales team and waste their time dealing with those. So what you can do is set up a simple IVR, interactive voice response menu, and Joel's going to go into a bit more detail on how these can be used, but basically an IVR is an automated phone menu that can ask simple or elaborate questions. It's up to you to qualify the caller first to make sure that they're sales ready before you pass them on to the right salesperson. Marketers should also consider how to route calls differently and contextually. So you have all this great information you're gathering around the marketing source of the call, where the caller is actually located, because you can do cell phone triangulation to know a caller is calling you from downtown Chicago, for example. You know the time and the day of the call. You have all this great information we covered around that specific conversion at the time the conversion's happening, and you can set up campaigns where the call can be automatically routed differently based on time of day or caller location or the keyword search they used or marketing source. So think about if there are places where you'd want to send a caller differently based on these factors. If you have a call center in one location on the East Coast versus the West Coast, do you want to send calls differently based on time of day? If you have different stores or different locations, for example, do you want to be able to send the caller to the closest store to where they're physically located? This is all possible in this new mobile world we're talking about, which you probably never thought about when you were doing desktop advertising. You can also pass the source of the call directly to the sales agent at the time of the call. So when the call comes in, the sales agent can actually see the person's phone number, where they're calling from, what marketing source drove the call, including the keyword search. And if you have a CRM system, you can actually link directly to that CRM system in order to show past history. The agent can call that up directly, during the call to have a more intelligent conversation, hopefully increase the chances of converting that caller to a sale or to an opportunity. Now, generating lots of calls and conversions is great, but really what you want to do, what marketers should be doing to impact the business is generating conversions that convert to revenue, that convert to appointments, that convert to opportunities. It's not just calls. You want that next step. So you want to be able to measure which of your campaigns is actually driving not just calls but revenue and driving quality calls and conversions. And you can do that in several different ways. One way is by generating reports on call duration. So the longer a conversation happens from your mobile marketing, that's usually an indicator that that's a higher quality sales call. And you can generate reports based on lead source for how long these conversations are taking place. You can record calls, and marketers can actually listen to these recordings and understand exactly what happened on the call, and then prove, if they need to either clients or their CEOs, the quality of each call based on call recordings. You can also integrate this data, as I mentioned before, in your CRM system. So as leads get passed through your sales cycle to revenue, you can tie that revenue and that lead back to the marketing source that called in, and therefore do reports and include that data in your reporting to do real meaningful ROI reports on which marketing campaigns are generating not just calls and leads, but revenue. Now, just quickly, one interesting new piece of technology that marketers are starting to adopt enables you to actually run keyword searches through conversations to pinpoint calls where certain words or phrases were used. So if you think about what the campaigns that you're running, are there words or phrases that might indicate a quality call? So, for example, are they looking to start a demo, or are they asking for a discount, or pricing information, or to make an appointment? If these words are said, you can actually pinpoint the calls where these words take place by running searches through transcribed conversations and literally listen in on the point of the call where that happens, or read the transcription about who said what, where the word was said, who said it. And this is a great way for you to understand what's happening on the calls, for you to get intelligence on how people are speaking about different terms that are great for improving your paid search, for example. You might see keywords that people are using, customers are using on calls that you haven't considered, and you may want to optimize your paid search campaigns on those specific keywords. But it's a great way to get insight into how when calls come in, to understand exactly what's happening on the call so you can improve your marketing and really prove the value to your CEO or to your clients. Joel is going to take over for a bit and talk a little bit more about optimizing for offline conversions.
Thanks, Blair. So lots of great ways, as Blair's run you through, for marketers and the tech folks and data folks that support them to really get a lot of insight about what's happening on the phone. And as much insight as possible, as we talked about earlier, having access to all of the data of what's taking place in media, online, offline is critical, but the last pillar of a holistic mobile strategy is really about understanding what's happening offline in a bit more detail, and that means digging into some places that marketers haven't had to deal with as much in general, and that's really operational issues inside the call center and the marketing issues inside the call center. So we're going to talk about how mobile brings all that into the forefront and how you can adjust in such a way as to really optimize your mobile revenue. So the first thing is to understand that, mobile people on mobile devices really have done their research, they tend to be lower in the purchase funnel, right? And so because they're lower in the purchase funnel, they have expectations. Either they have expectations in terms of specific questions that need to get answered, or they've already made a decision, but they just need to know one little thing, but they're close to closing. And so you really, as a marketer, want to take as much opportunity of that to leverage that higher propensity that mobile consumers have to convert. And that means making everything hum in the call center. When we see what happens when folks call, and we send them an IVR, which is, as Blair talked about, press 1 for sales or press 2 for service or whatever the case may be, about 40% of the folks that call select the purchase option. So the implications of that are that, depending on how well targeted or even, the most effectively targeted media strategy, there's a certain portion of that call volume that's going to come through that is not really going to translate into revenue. And you need to think about what the implications are for staffing your call center or for training your agents or for understanding how that volume of calls will affect the economics of your call center and of your marketing campaign. The other thing to understand here is that when we look about, the sort of on the other side of the equation, 40% of the total click volume we see across industries drives about 68% of call volume, right? So clearly, we're seeing that the truth of that higher propensity to convert. Folks are ready to take action when they're using their mobile devices. So how do you begin to think about accommodating that higher propensity to conversion? So one of the most important things is to understand operationally the impact of traffic spikes, right? We see a lot of traffic spiking in the call center based on mobile devices. And the best way that you have to deal with that, and Blair went through this to some degree, is through IVRs. And so here's really what that means. It means developing an understanding and kind of constantly, updating your understanding of what considerations in terms of, ads that people viewed or behavior on a site or what third-party data you may have about them, things like customer or non-customer that you can use to understand how to route that person through an IVR and filter out the traffic that you want to handle to agents who are ready to take those sales calls and close those customers, and for the traffic that's about customer service or other things that are not sales related, move them elsewhere and put them into a separate queue. So using the data to segment that inbound call volume is really going to give the opportunity to set up and run tests in the IVR to say, what are the ways that I can make sure that I can qualify someone as a real lead versus someone who really just wants to have a customer service question answered. And you can see the aggregate data in terms of arrival patterns and traffic. Customer service tends to happen in the evening. And sales volume or the sales call volume will drop. And so that has a specific staffing implication is that, you may not want to staff as much, or you may want to think about sending to different types of agents who may have a lower cost profile in aggregate to accommodate that customer service traffic or reallocate existing support agents to that, handling that call volume. The most important thing is that through the day, when you do see call volume spike and you have some sense of what those trends of call arrival are coming from mobile devices, again, higher propensity to convert, you've got really, really skilled agents prepared to answer those calls. So understanding, I think the most important thing about understanding that mobile call volume is understanding where they are in the process and where they're choosing to call, right? So people will call early on, generally speaking, after arriving at a landing page or just on the first page of your website, whatever they see, those folks tend to be calling for customer service. They're just looking for a number, and the first number that they see, they will call, and the amount of time you're spending on that call is going to take away, valuable agent time for dealing with sales calls. So you really want to understand where they are. Using the IVR to authenticate or identify or qualify consumers coming from mobile devices is really important. The more you're able to do that and the more you're able to filter non-sales calls out, the greater revenue per call you'll see. The other technique that we use is called skills-based routing, where basically, for folks using desktop, there's a general profile of questions or concerns that they will have, and there are agents who are specifically trained to that. But for mobile consumers who are calling, we really know that they tend to be lower in the funnel, and we know that there's a certain subset of questions that are going to answer that they're going to be able to close, and we develop particular skills in agents to be able to handle those kinds of calls quickly and efficiently so that we're going to be able to essentially capture that easier to close traffic more effectively. For other folks, depending on where they are in the purchase process, they may be deep into a detailed product page, and they want to talk about configuration, or they want to talk about different options, there's a different set of agents who are going to be more skilled at that consultative sales process. And again, the specifics will vary based on your industry, but those folks are going to need to be put into a situation where their questions are answered effectively. Those calls are going to take more time, so there's a cost implication to that and the amount of agent time that you're willing to dedicate to it. But generally speaking, that invested time in consultative selling will produce a lower churn rate in terms of customers leaving because they didn't get the things that they wanted after the transaction is completed. So really understanding those consumers and what they're about allows you to craft an agent staffing strategy as well as IVR to make sure that the right agent is getting the right consumer at the right time. So two sides to the equation here in terms of what we call a call handling strategy, right? One is for higher conversion. So we use a set of tools that we've talked about already and Blair's talked about as well. Use IVR messaging to say those things that are going to effectively filter out customer service calls, route people to consultative sales if that's what they need, route people to quick closers if they're on their phone sitting in traffic and just want to get something done. Use those IVRs to route to appropriate agents who are reading scripts that are specific to the things that we know. So if we have information about what ad someone saw or what product page they were on or what device they're using, we're able, or what media source that they came from, we're able to situate them properly and answer the questions that they had very quickly and close the sale. So we see that the better we're able to customize that call handling to match what we know about the consumer and the data that we've collected upon them, the better off we'll be. We'll increase our conversion rates. We will get higher revenue based on using the performance of particular agents to close particular types of consumers. And we'll take all of the disposition data out of the call center to figure out what campaigns are working effectively all the way back in the media landscape. So we see that for particular types of consumers, these media campaigns really produce a lot of customer service call, or they produce sufficient confusion that in the call center we're not able to close those consumers. Others are really effective in driving highly qualified leads, and those are the ones that we're going to invest our media dollars back in, and the underperforming media campaigns we're not going to use. So we begin to see how all of these different sources of data are connected together. And the other thing that we can do is make modifications to the digital conversion experience, what's happening on the websites or other places where they're trying to close on the device. We may be able to see that those folks who end up in the call center are ending up in the call center because they couldn't figure out how to complete the transaction on their device, or it got complicated or confusing, and we can go back and take those insights and optimize the online customer experience effectively that way. The other side of the equation is reducing cost. So with the same set of tools, we're going to try and prioritize as best we can those opportunities, those inbound mobile calls that are going to go to the best agents. And those top agent tiers will vary depending on what we're talking about, what type of consumer we're talking to, what kind of product we're trying to sell. Again, we talked earlier about consultative versus quick closer agents, but there are those agents who will always perform better, and we want to make sure that those consumers who are ready to purchase are getting to those top tier agents. Again, we can use IVRs to filter out those calls that are not going to be sales calls. We can also use specific campaign types of call routing. So particular kinds of media will drive to different routing to different centers that may be more expensive. For those media campaigns that may not be highly targeted, may be more general purpose, and we're not willing to invest as much agent time and cost associated with them. But the main thing here that we're doing to monitor to make sure that the costs stay low is that we're really looking closely and regularly about agent efficiency and productivity. How long are calls taking? What's their close rates like? Down at really granular detail. And we use some pretty involved analytics where we're tying together data from the call center itself, switch data, agent performance and disposition data, the financial data, the actual transaction fulfillment systems of our clients, to pull together a view on an individual agent level, what their performance is like, matched against individual segments of consumers, matched against the actual financial return. So we're not just optimizing here for, hey, did we close a sale, although that is certainly what we're interested in. We're also looking at things like lifetime customer value. So certain agents will close a lot of consumers who have a high propensity to buy and are ready to go, but end up washing out after the first months of service or returning the product that they purchased because they really didn't get told the right thing. And so we provide a really rich view into what's happening in the call center, because for a significant portion of the inbound traffic for many of our clients across industries, it's really getting closed in the call center, specifically for certain kinds of longer-term consumer products. So you really want to try to pull as much data together in terms of what's happening in the call center to be able to drive that holistic view that we talked about. So let's return to that for 1 second before we close here. So at the beginning, we talked about tying all the different sources of data together, right? Consumer data, that is device and location and what time it is, and any first-party data that as a client you may be able to provide, whether someone's a customer or not, for example, or other third-party data that may be available to display networks. The media data itself, right, sources and campaign information and down to the creative and keywords and things like that. The online session, that is the experience, what was the content or the variation of the content that someone saw, how long were they there, how much time did they spend, where were they when they called of particular importance, and then all the information that we just got through talking about in terms of what's taking place in the call center. So how do we tie all those things together and actually implement that holistic strategy, and what does something like that look like? So for our clients, what we're really doing is taking that mobile consumer and closing them effectively, both in the context of online and offline, by using all of that data together. So in our example here, we have someone who is searching for a sports package. This is a telecommunications client, right, and using a specific Apple device. And maybe through a display ad, we have some third-party data that suggests that folks that are part of MIA segment will respond to sports offers, which is not particularly surprising since she's searching for sports anyway in Google or Bing or wherever, and that folks who like that kind of content are really going to respond well to pay-per-view events. They're going to want to see the big game or the boxing match, whatever the case may be. And so we're taking those pieces of information about this particular individual consumer, and we're putting together variations in content on a landing page, in product information pages. We're deploying online testing and advisors about which particular pieces of creative to insert in the initial content that this person sees. And so we're privileging particular products based on what we know about that consumer. And since we know that she's coming in on an iPhone, we're going to put a prominent click-to-call on that initial landing page. And when she does call, since for this product it's fairly likely that the transaction process will complete online, we've got a defined script that's focused on sports and sports offers with an agent who's very familiar with the pay-per-view packages and offers that we can use to sweeten the deal, so that by the time Mia, our sports fan, gets to this point in the conversion process, we've said all of the right things. We've responded to the things that we know about her and with offers and specific content and products that she's going to be interested and increase her likelihood to convert. When you are able to deploy all the data to do that and able to monitor all of the output in terms of performance and efficiency and cost, you get a really, really powerful engine for optimization. What we have seen is that if you are able to actually deliver that holistic mobile strategy, which we've seen a lot of our clients very successful with this approach, we're seeing increases in terms of as much as 30 to 60% of overall digital conversion, right? And from a sales standpoint, we're seeing lifts in the region of 8 to 35%. And those variances are really based on industry and how long consumers have been shopping mobile in those particular industries, but really meaningful returns. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Blair, and we'll go through some additional information. Blair?
Thanks, Joel. So I wanted to close as well with a quick example, trying to tie together all of the rules and tips and topics that I covered already. So here's an example from a Dialogue Tech customer named Versatube, who was looking to drive leads and revenue using Google paid search and also email blast. So as part of this campaign, they used a Dialogue Tech's call attribution software to attribute, qualify, and manage callers from their campaigns. So the first step was whenever somebody called from their paid search campaigns in this example, that information was captured at the keyword level in Dialogue Tech software and passed into Google Analytics in order to, so Versatube can look and see side-by-side comparisons for each channel and what's driving calls, what's driving clicks. They can view web data alongside with call data in order to really understand what's happening and what's working in order to optimize getting more calls and conversions. Now, what's interesting with this case is that the way they treated the call once it came in. So in this example, when a call comes in on the left, it goes first to an IVR like Joel and I talked about. It's a really simple one in this case where it just asks the caller to press 1 to speak to sales. This is a great way to get rid of spam calls, and it's a great way to help the caller filter out some of the non-sales calls that will be coming in. But the first option was to press 1 to talk to sales. Now, if the call came in, if it was a sales call and it came in the morning, as you can see from the top, that call was automatically filtered to VersaTube agents working on the East Coast, and it was sent to every agent's cell phone at the exact same time. So all agents' cell phones would ring simultaneously with the first person picking up the call being the one that receives it. And if the call came in the late afternoon or in the evening when the East Coast agents were closed, those calls can be filtered directly to the West Coast agents who were still working. And the same scenario happened where it pinged the mobile phones all at the same time, and the first person who answered the call got the lead. And all that information was able to be managed centrally, so the call center manager, the sales manager, can see all the agents' activity, who's on a call, who's not, the amount of calls they've taken, how long those calls were lasting, and so on and so forth, help manage their agents remotely. They also recorded all the conversations and generated reports to see, again, the agents who took how many calls they took, how long these calls were lasting, in order to get a sense of their agent's performance, so they can help make improvements with each agent to see which one was doing better, and maybe help the ones that were not performing as well, in order to help close more deals, close more calls. And the end result was that they weren't just able to generate more phone leads using call analytics. They are able to increase revenue. So they're able to generate over 200% increase in phone leads, and actually an 89% increase in revenue, which is really what marketers are looking for at the end of the day using dialogue text call attribution technology and Google Analytics. So thanks a lot, everybody, for joining. I know there's still a bit of time for some Q&A, but before we go, I wanted to say if you wanted to learn more about dialogue text call attribution software, visit our website or give us a call. We've got some great case studies there as well. And if you're interested in talking to Leapfrog about how they can turn your data into new customers and get a demo of their LFX conversion platform, you can visit them online or give them a call. They also have some great case studies and resources to help you improve your marketing. So with that, I'll hand it back to our moderator, Al, for hopefully some Q&A.
Thanks, Blair. Thanks, Joel. Great presentation. Some really incredible stats in there in this fast-moving world of ours. First question, are click-to-call calls prioritized in the call center?
It
certainly can be. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Did you go? Actually, Joel, go ahead. You start.
I'd say, the most important thing here is to understand, whether or not you're running a mixed sales center with a customer service center. So many brands are kind of running combinations, or they're allocating traffic differently at different times. We found that it's most effective to try to separate pools of agents who are responding to sales calls. So anything that's on click-to-call on a site that's trying to drive conversion would go immediately and be prioritized. However, the other thing I'd say about click-to-call is that the answer really depends on where in the online purchase process or even the consideration process that consumer is. So folks who are doing click-to-call from within ad copy or within ad creative tend to have a little bit of a different profile from those who are, going to be clicking on click-to-call from, 2, 3, 4 pages in deep on a product detail page. So you want to capture some information first about what the likelihood of someone to actually convert will be, and then, prioritize those calls accordingly. So certainly the deeper into the process and the more consideration the consumer is on a mobile device, the higher we'll prioritize those calls. Blair, I'm sure you have some additional stuff to add to that.
Well, I think that's great. You covered most of what I would actually say. All I would say was that as marketers, you do have the ability to decide which calls get priority based on the different factors I went into. So if you decide that these calls are from certain channels are better than others, you can, have them jump the line if you want to. You can treat them, have them sent directly to your best sales agents, for example, if you have some that are better at closing deals than others. You can treat things in different ways, which is not always something that marketers consider when we create campaigns. Usually we just think about, okay, if someone calls, that's where my involvement ends. But really, as Joel has said and as I've said, there are great ways you can do to help do triage and send that caller to the best possible person to close it.
Great. Thanks, guys. Well, this is a good question, and it's topical because, with the smartphone revolution, search has just boomed on mobile. So people are, marketers are adjusting to it constantly. So here's a question that asks, what are the biggest mistakes with mobile local search you think marketers make?
Oh, that's a good question. The biggest mistakes, to me, of course, the biggest one would be not to use click-to-call. If you're not using click-to-call with local search, you could be missing a ton of conversion, since most of local search, over 50%, takes place on mobile devices. There's tons of data that Google provided that shows that people who run local searches usually take some action within the hour, whether that's visit the store or make a phone call. So you have to give them that option. The second part would be making sure you control where that call is routed. So if someone is calling locally, make sure you send that person to the closest store, for example, or the closest agent that can help them. And third, I would say, is make sure you use a local phone number. So if your mobile site lists out the phone number instead of using a call button, it's much better to have that phone number be a local call as opposed to a toll-free number, because people doing local searches are much more likely to click on local phone numbers than they are toll-free numbers.
Interesting. Joel, anything to add to that? I guess not. Wearables. The Apple Watch came out. It boomed. It's kind of slowed down, but wearables are going to be with us for a long time. Here's a question asked, do you think wearables will add more layers to the mobile search space?
Well, I touched on this for a little bit on the presentation. I think the jury's still out. A couple of weeks ago, I might have said that it had huge potential to sort of be that new smartphone that marketers need to concern themselves with, although sales figures recently have shown, at least for the Apple Watch, that those numbers are sort of leveled off and have dropped. I think the jury's still out on wearables. I think the idea that people can use whatever device they want to run a search using voice is a really interesting idea. And honestly, I think the marketers, we sort of have to be aware of it, but take a wait-and-see approach for now. Most of the conversions are still happening on smartphones, on tablets, and on desktops. So, pay attention to wearables, but I don't think it's a game changer just yet.
Yeah, I'd agree. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Joel.
Sure, I'd agree with what Blair's saying. I think what we tend to do is, whether it's wearables or a different new ad format or any kind of modification to consumer behavior, we really try as quickly as possible to run testing in terms of ad creative and different kinds of campaigns, testing in terms of a custom digital customer experience for folks using that new device, whether wearable or whatever the case may be, and just trying to understand what's happening. So, there can be a lot of anxiety about having to accommodate these new technologies, especially since they emerge so quickly and then all of a sudden become a huge part of what you have to deal with as a marketer. And the way to deal with that anxiety and to be prepared is to try and find that traffic when it comes in, or find that new consumer behavior, and construct some hypotheses around what you think that might mean for your particular brand and the thing that you're trying to sell, and then construct some tests to prove or disprove that hypothesis. And the volume may be light to begin with, but over time you'll develop more and more knowledge about what the implications of that particular technology or new format or whatever the case may be. So it's really having that sort of test-driven approach to gathering information about new technology that's going to benefit marketers the most.
Got it. And the question occurs to me with mobile search, and especially with wearables, since people, it's such a quick thing. They check something and they see something and they react quickly. Does it do anything with call durations, Blair? Do companies have less time to decide what a caller wants and refer it to a sales agent, for instance?
Well, I think, that's an interesting question. I think with, someone who, if you think about the mindset of someone who's running that search, there's certainly an immediacy to it. I think they want that information right away, and I think that the longer that you delay that information, the worse it is for you. So I think the ability to get that call to the best person who can answer that question as quickly as possible is probably quite important to wearables.
Got it. Yeah, it does quicken the game a touch. Gentlemen, we are out of time. Thanks very much for an incredible presentation today. A lot of great information packed into there. And thanks to all of you for joining us today for our webcast, The New Mobile Rules for Search, Social, and Display, which was brought to you by Dialogue Tech. Remember to watch for an email that will give you an on-demand link to be able to share a recording of this webcast with friends or associates, or watch it again yourselves. Also, you will be able be given a link to obtain the deck from today's presentation. Thanks again for attending. This is Al Urbanski for DM News. Have a great day and great business. Take care.